Hello there, and welcome to the All Day Digital Podcast, a CoBank knowledge exchange monthly audio program where we connect with communications executives and thought leaders to get their perspective on what's shaping the industry. I am your host, Jeff Johnston. The opportunities and challenges for rural broadband is a hot topic right now. On today's episode, we get to hear from Bill Baker, founder and CEO of NextLink Communications, a rural-focused communications company. Bill founded NextLink 8 years ago and has grown it to over 700 employees, servicing over 70,000 customers. So suffice to say, I was excited to get some time with Bill to talk about everything from mergers and acquisitions, the sky-high valuations in the market, LEO satellite threat, government funding, and so on. So, without any further ado, pitter-patter, let's hear what Bill has to say. Bill Baker, welcome to the podcast. It's a pleasure to have you here with us today.
Hey, great to be here.
Great. Hey, we got a lot of things to cover here as we sort of think about the forces that are shaping the broadband industry. 5 years ago, I don't know, rural broadband didn't maybe seem as sexy as it is today. And there just seems to be all sorts of interest from a regulatory standpoint, from a capital standpoint, from a technology standpoint. And I would just love to get your thoughts maybe as you think about the last 5 years, sort of where we were then and where we are now. And, what are some of those dynamics that played out?
Sure. Well, and we founded NextLink 9 years ago. So, I mean, certainly we've seen some radical change over that time period. But, when we started the business, rural broadband was a little bit of a sleepy business. Lots of people wanted decent internet service without a doubt, but you certainly haven't had, did not have the kind of streaming video dynamics 5, 7, 9 years ago that have just slowly built up over time. So, when you really go back 5 years ago, that's really when it started building, when you had, Netflix become a thing that most people wanted to have. And then you had all the other streaming platforms come on. And you've also had, very much an explosion in gaming where people don't really play a game on a platform with folks in the house anymore. People log in and they're playing an online multiplayer game. And that is the common sort of approach to gaming these days. So that one person, out in the countryside by themselves can literally go online and play real time with, hundreds, thousands of people. And so, we've seen that progression in the consumer sort of usage levels as a result of these technology options that they have. And with that, the demand has changed radically.
So that's interesting. So then here we are with, the last 18 months. Obviously, the pandemic has, I'm sure, also kind of upended things and I think brought into light, how vulnerable those who are living in rural America are who do not have, broadband access. So kind of love to get your thoughts on maybe how that's changed things as well.
Well, and not only was it speed that all of a sudden became critically important as everyone in the house, in a family environment, the kids are trying to go to school, the parents could be, working remotely, so not only do you have this explosion in demand, you also have a very strict requirement for quality that didn't exist before. And that's really, you had a big shakeout where a lot of folks changed service providers where they thought they had an adequate plan before, but all of a sudden now they're working from home and they find out their VPN connection won't hold. And it's kicking them offline at work all the time because their latency is so bad. So you not only saw a flight to speed to handle a truly multi-user environment at home, a much larger portion of the time, but you also saw movement to quality as well to providers that had better latency.
I think in response to a lot of this, we've got this talk of an infrastructure bill out of Washington and, there being $65 billion potentially, depending on if they get things figured out, going at this problem. So do you think it's enough? Is it sufficient? Is it kind of they going about it the right way?
Well, it all depends. The question, is it enough? It all depends on what are they going to require that it be used for. If it's 100% fiber, then it's nowhere near enough to address the rural, underserved areas of the country. It's nowhere near half of enough of what's needed,
Hmm.
and that's where the technology requirement, the speed dynamics that they're going to require, that's going to really go to how far and how many people get covered with this future spending in the current infrastructure bill. And so we just sort of need to see where the regulators are gonna end up on that. I mean, certainly we see the White House is very much pro fiber, and I completely agree. We're a hybrid provider. We do fiber and fixed wireless, and fiber is going to be able to give you symmetrical gig. The reality of it is there's not many homes that need symmetrical gig to meet their needs.
Yeah, I think that's a really important point. You need a good solid internet connection. You need decent speed, but yeah, you don't necessarily need it in close to a gig. So that actually that's a good segue into the next area I wanted to talk about, which is sort of the dynamics of fixed wireless, versus fiber. And as you mentioned, fiber is really the gold standard. Sometimes fixed wireless is the better solution. So maybe just kind of get your thoughts first off from a spectrum standpoint, thoughts on CBRS as it relates to fixed wireless and where that makes sense and doesn't make sense. And then maybe what's going to happen in the 6 gigahertz band. How do you think that could potentially play a role in some of these more, sparsely populated areas?
Well, that's a great question, because certainly when you look at CBRS, at 3.5, and even the upcoming 2.5 auction, those are frequencies that have non-line of sight, near line of sight performance through trees, which in the wireless world is pretty important. Not everybody is out in the middle of a prairie,
Right.
and so those frequencies certainly have a tremendous application in more treed environments. They're not going to get you a gig service, but you can certainly, we were one of the largest investors in CBRS when the FCC ran the auction across the Midwest United States. We've already uploaded in 2021 dozens of towers and have over 1,000 subscribers on CBS in rural environments, and easily deliver 100 meg download speeds. And we find it to be a great tool in the toolkit. I think as we move forward and look at higher speed deliveries, certainly the FCC finalizing the usage rules around the AFC and access to 6 gigahertz, that's going to enable dramatically higher speeds, especially in rural areas. And so, we really look forward to the FCC finalizing those rules, and really any fixed wireless provider out there who's utilizing 5 gig today is almost universally going to need to forklift and move into 6 gigahertz.
Mm.
The capability of that equipment at a relatively similar price point is just going to be radically higher. And I think that just goes to, if you're a fixed wireless provider in the marketplace today, you've got some major decisions to make over the next 12 months, because with the rollout of CBRS, with the upcoming rollout of 6 gigahertz, if you're operating on 5 gigahertz, someone is going to overbuild you with a fresh, much better performing technology in a different frequency.
Yeah, that's a great point. So on CBRS, licensed versus unlicensed. Obviously, license is the best, right? I would imagine so. But I mean, what are your thoughts there? I mean, where does it make sense maybe to do unlicensed and versus licensed?
Well, it just comes down to, there's a certain amount of frequency. Some of it is licensed, some of it's available for first come, first serve. And that's where you sort of get down to the issue of just common sense. If you're trying to go into an urban marketplace, of moderate population, almost certainly your licensed users in that county are using their frequency. That's why they bought it.
Mm. Hmm.
You probably have a much greater likelihood of unlicensed users already existing in an urban environment. So the question is you may be able to get some frequency allocated to you, but the question is how much, depending on who's already there. Now, turn that on the other side of the coin. If you move out into the rural environment, in the countryside of a county, and that's where you know you're probably going to have relatively unfettered access to unlicensed frequency because there's just not going to be that many users out there in a rural environment. And, there's a big difference between wanting to provide service and being obligated to provide
Mm-hmm.
service.
Mm-hmm.
And so that's what drove our investment in the frequency was we couldn't have a 90% comfort level. We were going to get the use of the frequency that we needed. We needed 100%. And so that's why we made the investment. Now, it has opened up the doors for us to operate and provide fixed wireless in urban environments with CBRS using licensed frequency. A great example is in Bryan College Station, a relatively populated Texas A&M University town. And we've gone into that market just recently with CBRS using our licensed frequency, where we'll be able to provide unfettered 100 meg download speeds to that entire community. And this goes back to fiber versus wireless. That town's been announced as by a fiber company to be built out with fiber.
Ah,
It'll take them over 2 years to do that. And they probably won't even do 100% of the town. There's going to be 10% that's just economically crazy to do, and they won't do it because it's not an obligation. It's an economic investment.
right.
Versus for us, we rolled out pervasive 100 meg fixed wireless service using licensed frequency in that community in 60 days.
Wow.
And
That's
that
amazing.
goes to the heart of fixed wireless versus fiber. It's not just economics, it's also time to market and the time it takes to roll out.
Back to a comment you made on 6 gigahertz. So maybe we don't have the answer to this yet, but I just love to get your thoughts on what do you think the throughput speeds, sort of all things being equal, I guess, on 6 gigahertz versus millimeter wave spectrum.
We have equipment from Cambium today. We are an alpha tester for them in our test bed, and we are getting a gig down at
Wow.
just over 2 miles. So we're very comfortable that we're going to have a 2 mile line of sight performance with a gig down, 500 meg up. But then you get to, well, okay, what about 3 miles, 4 miles, 5 miles? I mean, you're going to be able to get 100 meg performance on that equipment well beyond 5 miles.
Wow.
So I mean, you've got a tremendous propagation with that gear.
So let's move on, talk a little bit about kind of industry consolidation, M&A. As I think I mentioned earlier, I think, seems like there's been just a flood of money coming into this market. It's kind of high level, kind of where do you think we are right now in this space? And maybe, what is this going to look like over the next few years? It's just sort of a continuation of what we've been seeing, or any kind of thoughts there?
Yeah, well, M&A in the broadband market right now is very much a barbell. If you're in the fiber end of the market, it is white hot on the M&A front, and a tremendous amount of private equity capital flowing into the marketplace, looking for platforms, looking for scale through acquisition. The fixed wireless end of the market is a little bit of a different story. And that's where you've got a lot of rural operators who have been in the business for a long time. And the M&A market's been pretty soft for a while. And so for a lot of folks, it's more a matter of looking at where the industry is going and determining whether or not they want to make the kind of investments they need to upgrade their platform and upgrade their network. And if they don't, they're probably a seller. Otherwise, they're going to be overbuilt, and someone's just going to slowly pull all their subscribers away. So the multiples that you see for fiber deals versus fixed wireless deals are literally radically different. I mean, you've seen some really crazy multiples for some fiber platforms out there, 15 to 20 times EBITDA. Conversely, you see fixed wireless is generally sub 5 times EBITDA.
Yeah. And then what about some of the copper networks that are out there? We've seen some pretty significant deals here recently with Lumen, jettisoning a good bit of their copper network. I mean, how do you think about that? Do you think that are we going to see more M&A on some of these older networks as investors look to upgrade these networks, or or is it going to be more of company investment to replace their their older copper networks?
Yeah, I mean, for folks with the copper, sort of some of the legacy telephone legacy cable guys, that's a tough question, and they're in a tough spot because very much the market's moving to fiber now. You keep hearing about DOCSIS 4.0 is going to come out, and that's going to enable gig speeds, and honestly, when you go look at those companies that have fiber, I mean, they're honestly predominantly selling 100, 200, 300 meg plans because once a consumer has the speed they need that meets their needs in the household, a gig is just it's sexy, but why am I going to pay 40 or $50 a month more per sexy? And especially when you move in the rural environment where people are a little bit more economically sensitive. So I think the big question for the copper guys is, are you going to try and invest in that DOCSIS 4.0 technology to move your plant to the next level? Or are you just going to call a spade and go, this copper's got a limited life, and really the answer is to fiber it up. And this is just my observation. I don't have any copper plant myself, so I haven't had to deal with that decision yet.
Lucky you, lucky you.
Yeah. Well, I don't see very many copper operators at this point making upgrades. I mean, I just don't see it happening much in the market. You're seeing them basically let the market play out, and they're either deciding to overbuild themselves with fiber, or they're just running out their copper plant for as long as they can before someone else comes in and overbuilds them, because a lot of those big copper guys that are out there in the marketplace still, they don't have the capital to go into every single market they exist and overbuild themselves with fiber.
Yeah, you're right. That is a tough strategic position that they're in, right? That is
Right.
tough.
And that's where you see, honestly, a lot of these private equity backed fiber companies are jumping into these copper markets that have mediocre performance, and they're overbuilding them with fiber. So you're going to see a big shakeout in the next 5 years with some of these large national legacy telcos that used to have, a very large subscriber bases. They are going to fritter away as they just start getting overbuilt with fiber.
Well, I'd be remiss if I didn't bring up LEO satellites with you.
For
Be-
sure.
because that certainly is garnering all sorts of attention. I guess when you've got two of the richest people in the world throwing money at a new technology, we've got to kind of pay attention to it. So, there's arguments on both sides, but what do you think? What do you need to see, or what questions do you need to have answered?
Well, certainly the one getting all the press these days is Starlink, given that they're providing service. And while it's far from perfect today in performance, hey, I've driven a Tesla for 8 years, so I am a believer in Elon Musk's ability to improve his product on the fly. So I'm not a doubter from that standpoint, but you do have to look at the inherent, every technology's got its pros and cons. And, as we talk about 6 gigahertz and being a line of sight, which is the con, or one of the cons of 6 gigahertz. That's the same thing for LEO performance as well. Those satellites, they don't shoot through trees, and one of the dynamics is, as Starlink lowered the altitude of its constellation and brought the satellites closer to Earth in order to improve their latency and to improve throughput and speed. Well, one of the dynamics that they created when they did that was, you're connecting to their satellites lower on the horizon than when they're at the higher altitude, which
Hmm.
means trees are becoming a bigger and bigger problem as that satellite needs to tilt lower. So it creates a challenge for the consumer using Starlink. They got to get their dish higher, or they got to get out a chainsaw. Now, when you talk about where it's going to work better than terrestrial fixed wireless, I think that's where Starlink is at least today a competitive disadvantage in terms of its quality of service as well as the price of the service. You've got an economically sensitive consumer out in the rural area, and you look at the Starlink dynamic and you go, okay, guys, it's going to give you decent service, but it's going to cost you $500 up front, and it's going to cost you $100 a month. Oh, and by the way, you got to install it yourself, which means a lot of these folks are going to have to go hire somebody to install this at their home. So it's not just $500 to get it installed. So I think when you look at those dynamics combined, and somebody goes, well, hold on, I can get, you know, 50 or 75 meg from a fixed wireless terrestrial based provider, cheaper, much lower install, professional install done. I think that's where there's, still fixed wireless on the ground has a tremendous operating advantage over, the 800-pound gorilla of the LEO space, which is Starlink. I mean, I think we still need to see OneWeb come to market and see what their product can really do and how they're going to price it. But today, I mean, we certainly experience on our side a very distinct demand drop off when you get the price above $90. If you're going
Okay.
to charge for rural broadband, it very much drops off a cliff at $90. And so if you've got product price points, whether it's 25 meg, 50 meg, 75, 100 meg, if you've got product price points that meets people's needs in their household, not every household has, two parents and four kids. You meet a household's needs, they're going to probably not spend a whole lot more than they need on
Hmm.
broadband. If they can do that for $49 or $59 or $69, they're not going to spend $100 on Starlink.
Makes sense. Makes sense. Great. Well, I want to finish up here by asking you to look in your crystal ball because you've certainly been around a while and you've seen a lot of things evolve. And where do you sort of see things 3 to 5 years from now in this industry?
Well, I think definitely, the big change that's coming is the impact of the infrastructure bill. You can't pour billions and billions of dollars into the broadband provider marketplace without having some radical impact on delivery, especially in areas that are very poorly served today. So I think, ultimately the rules that they set for how those funds, what technologies are allowed to be used for those funds, what speeds are required to be used for those funds is going to go a long way in dictating the outcome of the broadband marketplace, and in particular, the rural broadband marketplace, where those funds are going to be spent. You get into the other dynamic in that program that could turn this into the wild, wild west, because historically those funds overwhelmingly were dispersed through the FCC. And right now, the indication is they're going to be doled out predominantly at the state level, with much like the ARPA funds, guidelines will be given, but a lot of the details will be left up to the individual states as to how they disperse those funds. So it'll be very interesting to see how each state, approaches the marketplace. Because I can tell you today, states have very different perspectives on how to dole out money into the rural broadband marketplace. Some of them are exclusively fiber centric. And if it's not fiber, they don't really want to spend it. And so ultimately, what they end up doing is taking what's relatively a small amount of money and dispersing it in an extremely small area of need, because, fiber dollars are not going to go very far. Versus other states look at that and they're somewhat technology neutral. And so they're impacting a much broader area because they're doing some fiber projects. They're also doing some fixed wireless projects. And then you've got some other states that look at some of the elements of, well, is there an existing CAF2 obligation in this market? Is there an existing RDOF obligation? And how do they deal with those? I mean, there's just so many wild cards at play. I think at the end of the day, one thing is definitive, and that is rural broadband in 5 years is going to be in a hell of a lot better place than it is today.
Great. Well, I could go on forever, but I know you have a business to run, so I don't want to keep you too long. But any sort of closing thoughts or closing remarks at all that I didn't cover with you here today?
Well, I think the one thing that, I'd like to say is, at least from Nextlink's perspective and my personal perspective, we love working in the rural broadband space because, sometimes people ask me, this business versus a different kind of business. I'm like going, we are in the business. It's in some respects like healthcare. We change people's lives. When you go around in a community we serve and people walk up to you and say, man, I used to have to drive to town to do my homework. People are now able to work from home because they took our service. I mean, there is an immense amount of pride that goes throughout our organization at every level about what we're able to do and how we're able to positively impact people's lives. You hear it a lot, but it's a digital world out there. And if you're trying to live in it with really bad internet service, it's tough. It is really tough. And so I think that's what I take pride in most about how we've been able to impact lives at NextLink.
Yeah, no doubt you're making a profound impact on rural America. So that's a beautiful thing for sure, because it needs it. So, well, listen, Bill, this has been just fantastic. I can't tell you how much I appreciate you spending some time with us today. So thank you so much for that. And this was incredibly enlightening, and I certainly enjoyed it. So thank you very much.
I appreciate it. Love being here, Jeff.
Wow, I could have talked to Bill for hours. He has such a deep understanding of what's happening in the rural communications market. I think what stood out for me most is the sheer amount of attention the rural broadband market is getting. The money coming out of Washington, combined with the billions in private capital that has been raised, is unprecedented. COVID-19 exposed how vulnerable rural Americans are who do not have access to a reliable broadband connection. And it's great to see the efforts being put in place to address this. I also think it's important to recognize that fixed wireless can and is playing an important role in lighting up high-cost, sparsely populated markets. The combination of the CBRS spectrum band and the 6 GHz band should enable operators to build high-speed, high-quality fixed wireless networks in rural America. Hey, thanks for joining us today, and please watch out for the next episode.
The information provided in this podcast is not intended to be investment, tax, or legal advice and should not be relied upon by listeners for such purposes. The information contained in this podcast has been compiled from what CoBank regards as reliable sources. However, CoBank does not make any representation or warranty regarding the content and disclaims any responsibility for the information, materials, third-party opinions, and data included in this podcast. In no event will CoBank be liable for any decision made or actions taken by any person or persons relying on the information contained in this podcast.